Good evening, welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Zakir Jacob. Russia has made a sensational disclosure today that they have detained an ISIS suicide bomber. Now, this bomber, he's been identified as Azimov by just a single name. He was entrusted reportedly with a mission to target BJP leaders here in India. Now, he traveled to Turkey earlier this year and was asked by one of his handlers in Turkey to go to India and avenge what was perceived to be an insult to Prophet Muhammad. The reference, of course, being to the comments that former BJP spokesperson Nupur Sharma made about Prophet Muhammad on a TV show. The question is, this has come as a total surprise and a total shock, not just to bystanders and lay viewers who are watching these developments, but also to our intelligence agencies, because yes, there have been known instances of Russians, Chechens, etc. joining ISIS, but this is the first time we've had an instance of a Russian being detained supposedly for going to India to attack because of a comment that was made a few months ago. Does this incident raise the specter, the prospect of ISIS terror still continuing to be a threat to India and India's interests? All right, so this is the Bleed India plot. Remember, there have been other instances of ISIS-related terrorists, either foreign nationals or even Indian nationals who have gone on to join that organization. But this is the first time we've had an instance of a Russian national being detained there, supposedly to carry out an attack here in India. The recruitment, it was a suspect who was brought into ISIS ranks as a suicide bomber. He's been identified as Azimov. He was indoctrinated remotely while he was in Turkey. For the earlier part of this year, Azimov traveled to Turkey and then he came back to Russia. The mission was to fly from Russia to India for quote-unquote a high-profile terror attack. Now, the attack, his handlers in Turkey told him, was for insulting Prophet Muhammad. Remember, there were comments made by former BJP spokesperson Nupur Sharma which were incendiary in nature, which of course had led to a huge backlash in the Muslim world. This man, Azimov, was entrusted by his handlers to avenge that. The modus operandi involved blowing himself up against this public representative or anyone of the ruling circle. In fact, he was to meet another person here in India who would then provide him with all the material, with all the logistic support, and then he was to go on and carry forth this suicide mission. But fortunately for India, and perhaps unfortunately for him, he got detained by the Russian authorities. But this is a big wake-up call for our security agencies and people who track this stuff very closely. Let me go across to our guests who are joining us on the broadcast this evening. Sushant Sareen is Senior Fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Dr. Tara Karta is former Director with the National Security Council Secretariat. Lieutenant General retired Sanjay Kulkarni, former DG Infantry, and Dr. Roxolana Zigon is a political analyst joining us from Russia. Let me start with you, Dr. Zigon, because we'd like to know, here in India, there is a great amount of curiosity as to who this man is, what his motivations were, and most importantly, how did the Russian authorities apprehend him? What led them to him, and how did they apprehend him?
Good evening, dear guests. Thank you for the opportunity to be the guest on this show. First of all, I would like to say that the Russian Federal Security Service has an extensive experience in counterterrorism operations, and obviously, to the information that we have for this moment, because FSB is not sharing pretty much information in public. So, but the information that we can operate, we can say that this guy who is has been located, and he's a regional, local from one of the Central Asian region country, has been spending time in Turkey from April until June. So he was obviously prepared, and that was a carefully elaborated plan of his dislocation in Russia and the following up transportation to India. And indeed, it's an unprecedented occasion because the first time FSB has identified a person from the Central Asia who has been planning a terror attack in India. And I think this is an evident fact. I don't think that it's a wake-up call for the security services of both countries, as well for Russia and for India, because it has been a set of communications and negotiations between the Secretary of the National Security Council of Russia, Mr. Nikolai Patrushev, and the advisor of Prime Minister of Narendra Modi of India, Mr. Ajit Doval. That was a set of communications starting from the last year until August of the current year. It has been massively discussed the issues of counter-terrorism attacks and the opportunities of much closer collaboration between our states.
Okay, let me ask Dr. Tara Karta, when this news broke and it was attributed to the Russian Federal Security Bureau, and of course a Russian news agency put this story out. But Dr. Karta, what was surprising was the Indian intelligence agencies were not sure about this. In fact, no information had been passed on to them by the Russian authorities till this afternoon. Subsequently, of course, after the arrest and after the news broke, the information has been shared. But how worrying is it that here you have a foreign national going to Turkey and then going to Russia, and the Russian security agencies apprehending him there, but he was supposedly en route to India to carry out a major terrorist attack here to target a political representative?
Oh, it's extremely worrying in this case because, like you said, we've never had such an instance before, as the previous speaker said. But having said that, I'm not terribly surprised at Turkey being part of this because much of what we've begun to expect from Pakistan, a lot of the disinformation, the communication, the finances, the social media content is all coming from Turkey. So Turkey, that kind of a link we've been seeing for some time. And I'll tell you why it's not surprising is because, Zaka, if you remember, this whole Islamic State started 2015. They were going on. They were all Afghanistan, Pakistan, all that. Yeah. Nothing about India. Okay. Until they formed this, suddenly one fine day they announced this, we're going to have an Islamic State of Pakistan and India. That was somewhere in 2019, late 2019, if I remember correctly. Then the whole group changes its character. Now it starts talking about India, that, there's a whole a kind of a Islamic State, that magazine is started up. You caught that guy in Hyderabad who was doing the magazine with some people from Kashmir. Feed was coming in from Kashmir, from Maldives, from within India. So the whole character of the group changed after 2019. And where was this whole publication being put together? It was being put together in Karachi. So you see, it is, to me, when I look at this, it is the same thing we've been seeing for years, except that now these guys are a little more careful for whatever reason. I'm not saying, I don't have proof that the Pakistani state is involved. All I'm saying is a lot of things which were concentrated in Pakistan has shifted elsewhere.
Okay. Because so Shansarin, what is even more worrying is this man has reportedly told the agencies there in Russia that he was entrusted with a task to avenge the quote-unquote insult to Prophet Muhammad. What does India do when it's suddenly opened itself up with the comments that we heard from Nupur Sharma and others? The way in which India has now become a potential target, and Indians have become a potential target of ISIS, one would have imagined that the ISIS threat would have receded after the war in the Middle East and the collapse of this whole idea, the 7th century idea of forming a caliphate and so on. But suddenly now, everybody's on the list, and anybody is a potential target, including a politician in India.
So, Zaka, number one, I don't think Nupur Sharma said anything which is not there in the religious texts of Islam. It's just been blown out of proportion. Maybe the way she said it, somebody could take umbrage, but it's very much there in the religious text. Unless, of course, people want to repudiate those texts. That's another matter altogether. The second thing is that I don't know, why we are getting this impression that India was never in the crosshairs of local, regional, and transnational jihadist groups. We've always been on the target list. We've always been there, and in fact, from around 2014, 2015, when the ISIS had come up, the ISIS Khorasan had come up, that Vilayat had been formed. Of course, as Tara is saying very correctly, the Pakistan and the Hind province chapters came much later. But ever since that point of time, India and the entire subcontinent has been seen as one of the largest growth markets for this ideology. It is we who have been fooling ourselves that we will remain untouched from this phenomena which is sweeping through Islamic societies across the globe. Uh, but the Russians have been pretty smart about it. A part of the reason being that there are a lot of Russians who have been involved in the ISIS, who have been part of the ISIS. So the threat perception in Russia is very high. I think the capacities and capabilities of the Russian intelligence is quite admirable. And number three, I think from whatever I've read in the open domain today, there were some conversations going on Telegram, which is essentially a Russian social media platform.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they were monitoring it all. But I think what is very worrisome for me, at least, is the fact that this guy was going to come to India and then tie up with a local cell of the ISIS. And I think that is something which we really need to start looking at much more carefully. And I think it's about time we stop staying in denial that, Muslims in India will not be affected by Al Qaeda or by ISIS or any of these other characters. I think we are as vulnerable as any other country to this particular phenomena. And the only good thing to come out of this news today is that if there was any denial or any complacency on the part of Indian authorities, I think that needs to go out of the window.
Okay, I want to ask General Kulkarni, I think it was George Bush who had famously said in many speeches actually that India, here's a country which has 100 million plus Muslims and not a single Al-Qaeda recruit. But surely that has changed. Certainly from 2014-15, we had this bunch of people who had gone to join ISIS in Afghanistan, in Syria. But after those wars concluded or drew down to a less active phase, it was felt that either many of these people have died in those countries or, the movement itself simply died. But now, this man being arrested in Russia, and that too potentially for coming to India to attack some kind of a political functionary for a perceived insult to Prophet Muhammad, how worried should the security agencies be about this?
Absolutely, Zakir. It is a matter of concern. It is without doubt, it is a matter of concern because it affects the 21st century peace and, prevailing all over. That is, they're hell-bent on ensuring that the caliphate spread. Everybody thought that the ISIS had, virtually had been wiped out or something. It isn't so. It was just an offshoot of Al Qaeda. 2014, you saw. Again in 2015, we heard names of Jihadi John, cubs of the caliphate. You saw how the Russian spies were killed and how they've been going about. Even Turks themselves have been in two minds. They have also celebrated al-Baghdadi. They've also celebrated the capture of al-Baghdadi's wife, sister. So you find that Turkey has not been wanting to be rather silent player when it comes to ISIS because their main targets are the Kurds. Of course, the Russians and the Turks also are under different war footing totally altogether when it comes to terrorism is concerned. Yeah. But when right now, when a person of maybe a Central Asian origin, maybe a Russian, who was being sent and trained and brainwashed, being sent to Turkey and been targeting, well, if something like this you will accept, and that this is a phenomena, and this is a radicalization, and it is an ideological war. In an ideological war, the perception management, and you noticed in India also, since about July, a lot of these NIA raids have been going on at the ICI. You saw Mosim Khan, that boy was caught from Butler House. He said, no, we are not part of it. We are not financing it, but he's a very innocent boy. All these kind of things, there's a lot of sleeper cells, a lot of fundings that is coming from all over. Obviously, we have to be very, very alert. Social platforms being utilized, cyber We have got to be very vigilant of what it is. We have to monitor what's going on. Our relationship with Russia has been so strong that Russians have been able to inform us that such a thing has happened. They also seem to feel that nobody will suspect a Russian, and therefore the Russian could easily find his way into India. And then you have, a lone wolf doing this kind of a thing. We have to be very, very alert. We cannot at all be complicit on these issues. We really need to have a minister in India for only internal security to ensure anti-terrorism, because this is something, a threat. And once they do, it's a question of striking one and then scaring the millions and being able to say that, well, look at the kind of roots that these people have. Obviously, there are a lot of sleeper cells. You know what's been going on in South. You see the NIA raid about 6 odd states in India where the ISIS have been targeting. We have to monitor social platforms. We have to see the internet, what's going on over there. There's nothing that we need to stop. It is a threat, and we have to be alive to it. We have to be very, very vigilant.
Dr. Zigon, Russia has also had its own tryst with Islamist terrorism, the Chechen terrorists, the Beslan school hostage crisis that we saw. But it was felt like over the last few years, especially after the defeat of ISIS in Syria and in other parts, in Iraq. But now this being revived through this man as a mob, how worried are Russian security folks there that there could be these cross-national groups or cross-national elements who, in this case, he went to Turkey, came back to Russia, was supposed to be en route to India. Who's to say that something, a corollary wouldn't happen? Let's say an Indian who goes to Turkey and then comes to Russia to target Russia for what is perceived as anti-Muslim moves.
Thank you for your question. I think it's quite a vital question, quite precise. Indeed, the Russian security service, FSB, actually, that you have mentioned, has an unprecedented experience in dealing with counterterrorism actions. And we have a great experience in communicating or preventing such terror attacks across Russia. And you have mentioned also the issues related to Chechnya and the patterns Russian security service used to utilize in this direction. But I would like to say another thought, I think, which is much more important in our daily discussion, because we have to look at this problem in a much broader context. And the first thought is related to the intensification of this geopolitical rivalry, of geopolitical tension and disbalance that we are all witnessing these days. And this kind of example of the terror attack and the terroristic implications are actually the resemblance or the reflection of those processes. Another thing is that India is going to host a big meeting in October this year, as soon as India actually is the head of the Counterterrorism Committee, was elected to be head of it. And it's going to gather for about 15 countries that will be joining in Mumbai, in Delhi, at the round table and discuss the emerging issues of the counter-terrorism battle.
All right.
And I think it's indeed it's an international aspect. And I guess that this kind of terror act was actually connected with upcoming events in Delhi, because India is one of the leading countries, and being as a member, not permanent yet, but as a member of the United Nations Security Council, India is up front of this issue on the international arena. And I think that this terror attack was a kind of symbol or a kind of sign to the Indian side to be alert.
Dr. Tara
I think
Karta,
that's the Indian security services and the advisors
one of the
of Mr.
other
Modi
points
has
of concern,
to
and you mentioned
accumulate its
this.
forces, its inner forces, international capacity, and to establish the direct contact with the Russian security service and to discuss what kind of plan, what kind of roadmap can be developed in this direction.
If I can go to Dr. Tara Karta, one of the concerns you flagged off was the concern around Turkey. But Turkey too, and they have their running issues with Russia. But look at what's been happening over the last a month or so. I mean, Putin goes and meets Erdogan. There is this meeting in Iran. There is a separate meeting after that. I believe that Turkey has bought from Russia more oil than it ever has purchased since the start of this war. So while they have their own issues and battles to fight, they've also sort of figured out a working mechanism, if you will. How does one begin to trust Turkey? Because, like you said, they've been running anti-India propaganda and an anti-India agenda for a while now.
That's a good question. I think first and foremost, Zaka, I think the fact that this happened has brought terrorism back into the center for Russia, India, and the international stage. Because, while we have a lot of issues with cooperation with the US, for the US, terrorism is no longer a number one priority. I mean, that is now very clear. It is in the back burner. They talk about it less. So this incident brings back this cooperation with Russia. Turkey, I think, is probably going to change a bit, because now, post this COVID, post Ukraine, the economic crunch, a country's priorities are going to change. They have to look after their people first and not just talk about, Kashmir with the Pakistanis and keep highlighting whatever Pakistan says. That doesn't pay. So there is also a threat to Turkey itself. There's a very strong threat to Russia, as Mrs. Saigon said.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a potential here for cooperation, because believe me, given that, I mean, they made the threat, right? Post Nupur Sharma,
Yes.
They actually said that we are going to do this. So there's no reason for us to think that they're just saying it for the head, just like that. So we can expect more. And the lone wolf problem is huge. I mean, and Russian FSB's intelligence capabilities are massive. I mean, they are extremely able, and luckily, as a friendly country, they can share it with us, but expect it from other quarters as well. That's all I have to say.
All right. Sushant, I'll give you the final word. I got to wrap up in a minute. Just in terms of, how does one stop these lone wolf attempts? I mean, clearly, you can't have agencies so hardwired in a way that even individuals can be stopped. In this case, I guess we got lucky, as Dr. Tara Karta was saying, that it happens to be Russia, and Russia is a friendly country. They can share that intel with us. But what if this person was found in an unfriendly country?
But this is not a lone wolf attack or an attempted attack. In fact, there is hardly any lone wolf attack, Zaka. This was a guy who was roped in by a network. So he was indoctrinated, he was trained, he was motivated in Turkey. He must have been facilitated by somebody in Russia. He was going to come to India and tie up with a local cell out here. That's not what a lone wolf does. The lone wolf is a guy who's sitting in some room somewhere, sees something on TV or something, or hears something on, in the newspaper, or reads something on the newspapers, and then decides that he's just going to take a knife and just going to maybe kill somebody, or take a car and kill somebody, or take a gun and shoot somebody. So this is not a lone wolf attack. This is part of a network, which is why it is easier to bust these kind of attempted attacks, rather than somebody who suddenly goes crazy one day and decides to blow himself up. Even that's not easy, because for blowing yourself up, you've got to get the explosives, you have to have that technology, you have to have that motivation, and it's not easy for a lone wolf to do it. So that's a bit of a misnomer. But I think that is exactly what the security services are supposed to do.
All right, I got to leave it at that. I'm completely out of time. Thank you very much, Sushant Sareen, Dr. Tara Karta, Dr. Saigon, and of course, General Kulkarni for joining us. We got more breaking news coming in. Campaigning in Gujarat, AAP convener Arvind Kejriwal is now stepping up his attack on the BJP. This is on the back of the excise scam in which Manish Sisodia has been named as accused number 1. Kejriwal has now said that raids at Sisodia's house are because of the great response that Aam Aadmi Party is getting in Gujarat. In fact, Kejriwal calls it a dharm yudh and goes on to say that while the centre has the ED, it has the CBI, and it has money, the Aam Aadmi Party has on its side Shri Krishna. Let's listen into what Kejriwal said, and then I'll go across to my colleague.
आज इन लोगों के पास पूरी सेना है, इन लोगों के पास पूरी ताकत है, इनके पास सीबीआई है, इनके पास ईडी है, इनके पास इनकम टैक्स है, इनके पास पुलिस है, इनके पास सारी इतना पैसा है इन लोगों के पास. हमारे साथ श्री कृष्ण है, हमारे साथ भगवान है, और अंत में जीत सच्चाई की होगी, भगवान की होगी।
All right, I want to go across to Rupashri. So, Kejriwal really stepping up the attack against the BJP. You've been there for the last 10 plus hours now. What is the response the AAP is getting from Gujarat? Because Gujarati society, of course, is a very different ball game from winning elections, let's say, in Delhi or in Punjab.
Well, absolutely, Zaka. I mean, make no mistake, the Aam Aadmi Party has to work extremely hard in order to break ground in Gujarat. Unlike others, many other states, for instance, Punjab or even Delhi or Goa, Gujarat has its own challenges. It is very, very large, and people, established political parties also like the BJP and the Congress Party, they have their strongholds which are very difficult to break into. I'll just ask my camera person to just pan and show you the kind of people who have come in for this town hall in this Sabarkantha district in Gujarat. This is in Himmatnagar, and the hall was absolutely packed. And I heard people cheering on Arvind Kejriwal when he was speaking about his various guarantees that he would give to the people. And also, they were echoing him when he asked whether work is being done in Gujarat or in school or in the health sector, for instance. One question that he put to the people is, how many of you go to government hospitals when you are unwell? And the answer to that was an unequivocal no. So nobody goes to government hospitals when they're unwell. That is the kind of discontent that is there amongst people over here. But it will be very difficult to translate that into votes. And Aam Aadmi Party knows that. We have to wait and see whether Aam Aadmi Party is successful in making this a triangular contest. The other important news point that came out is Arvind Kejriwal strongly defended his jailed minister Satyendra Jain, and as the Aam Aadmi Party sees it, about to be jailed minister Manish Sisodia.
Okay.
And he said that had they been corrupt, if I knew that they were corrupt, I would have thrown them out also. The last point I wanted to make, Zaka, is about the emotional response of Manish Sisodia, who said that he was not scared even for a moment when the CBI raided his house, except that he felt a little sad, because one feels sad when people come into your house and they go through your almiras, a child's guitar, your wife's clothes, and therefore he was sad, but he is not scared at all. So
Okay.
a very strong signal coming out from the Aam Aadmi Party, cocking a snook in fact at the BJP.
Okay, we'll see how this plays out. Gujarat, of course, is going to be a completely different ball game as far as the AAP is concerned. Perhaps way more difficult a state to crack, if you will, compared to, let's say, a Punjab or a Delhi or even Goa, where they had some reasonable success. Meanwhile, let's move on to the other face-off that's happening between the CPIM-led Kerala government of Pinarayi Vijayan and the state governor there, Arif Mohammed Khan. It's now further intensified. The Kerala government is all set to introduce a bill in this assembly session curbing the powers of the governor in appointing chancellors and vice-chancellors of universities. Now, this comes after Governor Arif Mohammed Khan stayed the appointment of Priya Varghese as an associate professor in Kannur University. Meanwhile, the Kerala High Court has stayed the appointment of Priya Varghese till the end of this month on the petition of the second rank holder, he or she who lost the job in the process. Remember, Priya Varghese is the wife of Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan's private secretary, K.K. Ragesh. Let me go across to Neetu Raghukumar with more details on this. So, this has now become a big bone of contention between the governor and the CPIM there. Is there cross-party support, though, for this bill to try and curtail the powers of the governor, or is the main opposition Congress opposed to this bill?
See, the opposition leader has openly opposed this bill, stating that this has come in at a time when there is so much issue happening, and the aim of the LDF government for bringing this is to have nepotism in the appointment of universities, because they want their party, the families of their party leaders to be appointed. So that is what the opposition leader has said. In all possibility, it looks like the opposition will be opposing. There will be discussion over it. The bill draft has just come out. So that is something which the opposition has already said. The face-off between the government and the governor is continuing, with both sides not backing off. Yesterday, the governor went ahead and even said that called the vice chancellor a criminal, and the LDF and the CPM coming out against it, saying that the governor is trying to play politics. So that is continuing, and we'll have to wait and watch in the assembly how this is going to plan out, because it's not just this, but the Lokayukta bill is also expected to be brought in this assembly session.
All right, Neetu, we'll leave it at that. Neetu Raghukumar there reporting for us from Thiruvananthapuram. We'll see how this story, this intense face-off between the governor and the CPM government there in Kerala, how it further proceeds. That's a wrap. In a moment, Ridhima will join you with the biggest exclusive.